Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another deck profile. Back-to-back profiles this week. This time we're going over my mono red Bulma build. So late last week I brought you guys some Bulma gameplay. I know a lot of you guys wanted to see that list. Bulma for me is probably the best mono red leader. Not really kind of like Broly, because Broly is really just an archetype deck. I wouldn't really call it like a pure red deck when you're just looking at red good stuff. I would call it much more of like an archetype deck. But today we're going over Bulma. Guys, if you're new here, definitely subscribe, hit that bell to miss a video. If you want to support the channel, go down in the description. Particularly today, you can use my link to TCG Player if you want to buy or pre-order anything you see in today's video. That being said, let's get started. So back to what I said before, I really do think Bulma is probably the best mono red leader. Like, a lot of people thought it would be Yamcha, right? Yamcha coming out in set 10 because he does have great generic effects. Attack, look at top 2, add any red card, fills the drop if you want to play some type of overwhelm or some type of drop centric deck, and he gives additional burn damage, and it seems like they're pushing burn damage in red pretty hard, so it makes sense that you would think Yamcha would be the best leader. But realistically, I think that falls to Bulma for two reasons, one of which is just like overall topping representation. Since set 10, I'm pretty sure Bulma has had leagues more tops than Yamcha has ever kind of dreamed of, and Bulma honestly just gives you the most utility. Like, there's a lot of great cards that take advantage of her, giving all Saiyans and Earthlings blocker. She awakens and untaps 2, which is always an incredible effect, and her backside draws 2. So the main downside to Bulma is letting attacks get to you and having to combo out of them, but the card pool has evolved in such a way that Bulma really doesn't have to deal with that almost ever. Like, unless you just like draw an absolutely unplayable hand and don't draw anything decent for, I don't know, 4 turns, you're going to be able to get blockers on board. You're going to be able to do what Bulma wants to do. The gameplay I showed you guys last week, I got to 2 life. I'm pretty sure on my opponent's turn 2, I stayed at 2 life the rest of the game and won the game on like turn 6 or something like that. So the deck can be very, very defensive. I think this is the best leader to probably house any type of just mono red good stuff. Even like red green, I think it'd be quite good with this, but this is a mono red variant, so we'll just get into it real quick, guys. She draws 1 on the front, draws 2 on the back, awakens, untaps 2. Very, very simple. Gives all yellow sands and earthlings blockers. So moving on, this is kind of like the hype right now. This little triage here is kind of like the hype right now. Let me explain. So Bardock Strategic Mind is a very, very hyped card right now. Got bought out in TCG Player I think last week, but now they're settling at about $5 per copy, which is fine because I mean it's an SR from a set, right? It was like less than $1 before anyone realized it was any good, but in this deck in particular, it's very, very good. So when you play Bardock Strategic Mind, it has deflect, so it's always resolving its effect. Auto if your leader's mono red. When this card's played, choose one of your red unison cards and add 3 markers to it. So upon first glance, this does seem like a pretty underwhelming card, but in Bulma, it just goes over the top for a few reasons. One of which is the fact that this guy is a 20k blocker when he's played, so he does give you some value defense even if you were to tap out for him, right? Now, the main reason he's so good is because of the red unisons. If these red unisons didn't exist, Bardock Strategic Mind would not be nearly as good. So Jiren Legend of Universe 11 is not quite as hype when it comes to Strategic Mind as Vegito Unison of Might is. Unison of Might is a great card, right? So Unison of Might, what he does is a 4-drop unison, so he does come out a little bit late. +1, draw a card, then choose 1 mono red battle card, the energy cost of 2 or less in your hand, and play it. There are many cards in this deck that synergizes with. The -2 is the real kicker, though. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, if your opponent would play a battle card using a skill, it's placed in the owner's drop area instead. There are so many decks in this meta playing battle cards by skills. Union Fusion, Send Shenron Leader effect, blue with like counter. There are just so many decks. Like, pretty much every deck plays battle cards by skills. Otherwise, it's not really a meta deck, let's just face it. So that -2 is incredible. Sometimes this card comes out a little bit late. It's definitely much, much better when you're going first as Bulma, but it's still really good. -5 deals a burn damage if your opponent's board is clear. That's not going to come up all that often, but it can win the game in a pinch. So basically playing Bardock to give him 3 markers every turn and then just use the -2 is a way to lock many opponents out of playing the game once you get to turn 4 and beyond, right? Jiren Legend of Universe 11, though, is a card I don't really see many Bulma lists playing. That the secondary unison you play in this deck, sometimes some lists play no other unison, some other lists play like the red Shenron unison, which is not bad, especially with Yamcha the Lawless. But Jiren Legend of Universe 11 is such a crazy card, right? Like, when your opponent plays a battle card or a unison, you can give it -10, so that even serves like removal in some aspects, but other than that, you're just basically making bigger attacks come through smaller. The +1 gives double strike, but the best thing about it is the -3 you can use during your opponent's turn, right? So play it for 3, give it +1, swing for double strike. During your opponent's turn, your -3 is live. which says choose one of your opponent's battle cards, ignoring barrier, gets minus 25,000 power for the turn. So much like how Vegito is like locking your opponent out of the game, Jiren is really shutting down your opponent's turn in a lot of ways, especially if they're only producing like one big attacker per turn. If they're going a little bit wide, Jiren can still help with that because of the minus 10 he offers, but that minus 25 is just so strong defensively, and combo that with Bardock Strategic Mind, it's a really strong combo that I've seen. I've been playing this Bulma deck for probably over a month now at this point, and I've been playing this engine for a very, very long time. It's super good. Jiren, honestly, in my head, overperforms more than Unison of Might, but there are instances that Unison of Might will just pretty much win you the game in certain scenarios, right? So moving along, we're main decking for my King Piccolo's Underling. Now, this is the silver bullet from Draft Box 6 that basically tells Blue, hey, if you use Dimension Magic, I'm killing a life and I'm killing an energy, and you're going to be so far behind. That's what this card is. But why am I playing it in the main deck in Bulma? It's not because Blue is like some awful matchup for this deck. It's not just to like spit in the face of Blue. It's because it's a barrier Earthling that draws a card. In Bulma, this is a 1-drop barrier blocker that draws. This is literally the perfect card for Bulma. Honestly, the secondary auto is pretty much just extra stuff added on. When you play against Blue, sure, it's cool, it's great, I mean, it's really strong, but the main purpose of it is just 1-drop barrier blocker. I think every Bulma deck should main deck 4 copies of this card. You want a turn 1 play, this is the best one because it replaces itself and is a barrier blocker. It's absolutely incredible. I'm spamming this thing every single turn I get the opportunity to. Rogue Duo Videl, I find a lot of success with. I do see some builds not playing it, but the fact that it just negates and then blocks, it's a 2-for-1 attack stopper for 1 energy and 1 card. It really has been super clutch for me in a lot of scenarios, so I really like it, especially at 4. I can see maybe cutting it to 3, but for me, every time I have it, I have the ability to use it. It never lets me down, so I like it a lot. Broly Crown Retribution, this is again like a Marcus tech here. He recommends we all play this in like all of our red decks. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's kind of meh. There are a lot of decks that do tap out, and of course he's a lot more lackluster in those matchups, but this is a grindy deck. You're not playing a fast aggro deck. I wouldn't say you're quite playing a control deck. You're very much in the mid-range spectrum with Bulma here, and Broly does excel in those mid-range mirrors, sometimes those control matchups, and he serves as a blocker for the deck, so he definitely is really good. So definitely want to include him here. For Yamcha the Lawless, this is my ideal turn 2 play. You can't ask for much more in this guy. He is a blocker thanks to Bulma, but besides that, at the end of each turn, you're drawing a card with his effect. So a lot of times you're just playing him in active mode and letting him sit there, and then when it gets to that later part of the game, he can be a threat at a moment's notice. Pay 2, activate battle, give him plus 15 and double strike, and there's not really too much of like that, that battle interruption or that skill interruption during a battle. So it's actually a lot more safer to go in with battle cards nowadays. It is really solid, and this is why a lot of people play the new Shenron Unison that came out in the expansion sets. It's definitely really good, but I think the value that Jiren offers you is a little bit better. So basically, turn 1 you're going for Mai, turn 2 you're going for Yamcha the Lawless, turn 3 you're going for Jiren. You can mulligan for all 3 of those cards, and you'll pretty much have an amazing curve going into the beginning of your game. So super combo is playing Raditz Saiyan Youth. You have a few options here. You can even play Nappa in this slot if you really wanted the extra blockers, and that might be solid in like a super aggro heavy meta like we are in now. But Raditz is also great just to draw 2, just filtering through your deck, getting rid of the worst card in your hand. It's always a solid effect, but I could definitely see Nappa in this slot for sure. 3, Yamcha Merciless Barrage. There are so many decks where this card is medium to like mediocre, but in this deck it's extra good because it is basically just a free on-demand blocker, and again, you should have Jiren out most of the time, so he does serve his purpose quite well. The minus 15 comes up sometimes, but realistically the free play blocker is honestly the best part about this card in this particular deck. Moving along, this is the beef of the deck. So we have 3 King Piccolo New Ruler. When you have Jiren out, this is a free double striker, so that puts on a ton of pressure. It's honestly just a really snapped card, especially in a red deck like this. Some red decks you can't fit it. Like for instance, I can't really fit this card in like my red Gogeta build. Let me know in the comments below if you want to see that. I'm actually super hyped about that list. But anyways, yeah, it's amazing in a mono red mid-range deck where you just want to play the best red cards available. King Piccolo 5 seconds to eradication. This is our Obuni. This is our Grim Reaper of Justice. This is our main guy. We're slamming on 4, and because of all the blockers we generate over the course of the game, because of our untapped 2, because of our innate defense, this guy is especially good in Bulma, where it might not be so great in other decks. Bulma just has everything going for it. Like I said, the untapped 2, the blockers you generate early, the free blocker with Yamcha Merciless. This card's amazing. So deflect, double strike, barrier, all the forms of protection. Permanent, if your leader card is red, your opponent can't activate blocker skills in response to this card's attack. So that's an immense help against things like Sin Shenron, right? Auto once per turn, if your leader is red, when this card attacks, choose one of your red unisons and add a marker to it. So kind of like a small Bardock Strategic Mind in that sense. Auto, add 1 card from light to hand when this card's attack is negated. deal 1 damage to the opponent. So sometimes actually you get stalled out as Bulma and you don't really have any other form of inherent self-awaken, but when you get to that later part of the game, if you're on turn 4 and you're still at 6 life, you play this guy's swing, what are they going to do? They're going to super combo out of it, they're going to negate it, and in which case they negate it, you get some self-awaken. That's really good. I am playing Black Smoke Dragon Eternal Evil, and we saw the spoilers for the secret rares. It doesn't seem like any of them are going to be super playable in Bulma in particular. I'm not a big fan of SS4 Gogeta because I really don't like the idea of not being able to play battle cards. I mean, the whole shtick of the deck is, you know, generating blockers, using Videl to negate and then block. So I don't really like SS4 Gogeta in this build. You could like take out Smoke Dragon and possibly just play Fu, Shrouded, and Mystery. You can very easily get to turn 6 in this deck with all the defense and pretty much generate the 10 and drop required to play it. But I like Smoke Dragon. It's turn earlier. Most decks it actually is just like absolutely devastating. The only matchup it's really bad is against blue because they can just bounce it back to your hand. But besides that, great in every other matchup. You have a lot of other stuff for blue, like the Deflect King Piccolo, for instance, and even New Ruler. Just a 0 energy way to apply pressure. They're not going to trunks that, right? And we also main deck Mai, so that's another thing we have going for us against blue. Topo Registration at 4, of course, it's Topo, we're playing it. 2 SS Vegeta Exploiting Weakness. Luckily, this card is getting reprinted in a few months. It's really good. I mean, it's a blocker, gives you a little plus 5k, which helps because you're kind of small, and serves as a blocker. Vegeta, Bulma's husband, what else can you ask for? Finally, for the extra cards, guys, we have 4 Wolfang Fist. When you have the Unison in play, it's just free. It's really solid. It saves my butt in a lot of scenarios. 3 Frieza Death Ball, which I think is a pretty slept on red extra card. It is really, really good, this deck. We're not really running too many, or really any 1-drop 10ks except for Smoke Dragon, I don't think. So having Frieza Death Ball just a combo at 25 for 1 card has been excellent for me. And then 2 Violent Rays. There are a lot of decks this is really, really good against, like Red Broly, some of the other aggro decks like Dark Broly. But one thing I want to mention for you guys, a little budget alternative to Violent Rays, Master Roshi Martial Virtuoso. In Bulma, he's almost as good as Violent Rays. He's not quite as good in some matchups, but in certain matchups like Dark Broly and anything that basically swings to 25k and above, Master Roshi is kind of arguably the better card. So you counterattack with it, and it doesn't actually stop the attack, but you can block in that same attack because you haven't stopped the attack. It still goes to autos, and since it gains blocker with Bulma, well, there you go. So counterattack, block, you stop whatever attack you're looking to stop, and then for the rest of the turn, your opponent can't attack with 25k or higher battle cards. So that is great in those matchups. It just doesn't encapsulate the 20ks between 20 and 25k, so a little unfortunate, but it is a great budget alternative. I 100% recommend it if you're going to play this deck but don't quite have access to Violent Rays. So anyways, guys, that's the deck. I hope you enjoyed it. I do want to know in the comments below what you think. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.